Hello friends, it's Kristie Marcotte. In today's video, I'll be making some cards using Honeybee Stamps Lovely Layers Roses die set. The paper collection I'll be using is their new Hugs and Kisses collection. The Lovely Layer die sets are so fun and easy to use, and the end results are just stunning. So I've gone ahead and cut out all of the petals for the rose and also the stem and the leaves. The full-size rose bloom has 7 different dies that you'll layer together. I used 6 different shades of cardstock. I have the darkest shade in the back and it gradually gets lighter until that tiny little piece in the front. I'm using Honeybee Stamps liquid adhesive to adhere all of the flower pieces together. I decided not to add adhesive to the very top of the petals. That way if I want to curl them to add that visual dimension, I can. I'm just putting liquid adhesive at the bottom, and to help line everything up, I'm following that very bottom edge of the die cut pieces. Most of the petals have that same pattern at the very bottom, so it's really easy to layer them together and get the correct placement. I love how the image really starts to come together as you add another layer, and having the different shades of cardstock adds that beautiful dimension. So this is the final piece for the large rose flower. Now I'll start assembling the stem and the leaves, and there aren't quite as many pieces for this. You could use just this background piece with the stem and the leaves, but if you want that extra detail, you can cut out the additional leaves and glue them on top. Only one of the leaves on that full stem piece has the etch detail for the veins on the leaves. So if you want to have the etch detail for the other leaves, you will need to cut those out individually and adhere them on top. And I decided to cut out 2 of the leaves from a different shade of green. At the very top of the stem, there's also 3 individual leaves you can add, and they have that etch detail as well. I really like the look of the leaves with the 3 shades of green. And the cardstock I'm using for the flower and the leaves is just some scrap cardstock I have in my stash. Next, I'll add some paint splatter to just the rose. I'm using some gold paint. Just put some water on the paint, put my paintbrush in there, and I'm tapping it lightly over the flower. Now you can see that beautiful metallic shine from the gold paint. The pattern paper I'll be using has this lovely design in the background, and I love how it's faded in the center and it gets a little darker toward the outside. I'm layering this on some white shimmer cardstock, and then again on some cardstock that matches the flower. You can see I did cut out a die cut from that background piece, and I'll be adding that to the card here in a moment. I'll put some ATG tape on the back of this piece and put my card front onto a card base. And all of my cards in this video are American Standard A2 size. Now I can glue down the flower stem and leaves. Put some liquid adhesive on the back and glue this directly onto the card, more in the center. I can attach my lovely flower, and the paint was not quite dry, so I was trying to be really careful not to touch the flower very much. So I could tell once I put my hand to really put some pressure on, I ended up with some gold polka dots all over it. For the sentiment on my card, I'm using the Bitty Buzzwords Be Mine stamp and die set. So I have the word always. I use some white shimmer cardstock for the word, and here you can see the outline that I cut out from that background cardstock layer. I use Honeybee Stamps liquid adhesive to adhere those 2 pieces together. And I've already stamped out the rest of the sentiment and forever. I use Honeybee Stamps Intense Black ink and stamped it on some white cardstock. I'll be adhering the sentiment on top of the leaves on the rose. So before I adhere them in place, I want to keep everything at the same level, and since the very right side is going on top of some extra cardstock layers, I decided to use some of Honeybee Stamps white foam strips on the left side. These are really nice and thin, so it's the perfect amount of thickness. And I like that you can also trim them down. On the right side of the sentiment, I did decide to put a scrap piece of cardstock, and now everything is at the same level. So So I'll remove the release paper, put some liquid adhesive on the back, and attach the always and forever sentiment to the card. I think this would be the perfect card for a wedding or anniversary. And if it's for a wedding, you could change the color of the rose to match the colors in the wedding. I'll do the same thing to the stamp sentiment, adding that foam dimension on the left side and a small scrap piece of cardstock on the right side. Then I'll tuck it underneath the word always. So trying to make sure to get it nice and straight. Then for a final finishing touch, I'm using Honeybee Stamps Small Clear Dewdrops. I love these, they're the perfect size. And since they're clear, they go with any collection. I'll put 2 of them underneath the sentiment on the left and 1 underneath the rose on the right. To adhere them in place, I put a very small drop of liquid adhesive. I'm using an embellishment wand to pick those up and then press them in place. So there is my finished card, and I did make 2 using this design. I love how this turned out. Honeybee Stamps lovely layer sets are some of my favorites. I decided to make a second card. I'm still using the Lovely Layers rose die set and the Hugs and Kisses pattern paper. So for this rose, it will all be yellow. So it's the exact same shade of yellow. But I want to add a little bit of dimension, so I'm using the Tiara Color ink from Catherine Pooler. I have a blending brush from Honeybee Stamps and adding just a little bit of ink to the edges. And I did speed up this portion quite a bit. I am not that fast at crafting, although it would be nice sometimes. I'm on the final piece. I can set that aside and start adhering all of these together. Even though I only used 1 color of cardstock, adding the ink to the very edges will create that dimensional look. Once I have my lovely yellow rose all attached, I'll set this aside and start working on the background of my card. I selected another pattern paper, this time in green, and it has leafy vines all over the background. I'm using a stitch scallop circle die, cut out one of the larger circles from the background. Now I'm using both of the pieces. I'll be layering this on some craft colored cardstock. And before I attach either of the pieces, I want to make sure they're still at the same direction. That circle could have rotated slightly, and I want that pattern paper to still line up. So you can see I'm rotating it, trying to find where the leaf and all of the vines are. I'm gluing down the circle first, just use some liquid adhesive. Then I'll put my card front onto a card base. Now for the other portion of the pattern paper, I'll be popping this up with some foam dimension. I'm using the regular Scotch foam dimension, and I want to make sure to get good coverage so there isn't one area that sags. So lots of cutting down this foam dimension. I have some small pieces to go right around that circle, filling in all those little gaps. So once I have that all in place, I can remove the release paper. I always purchase this Scotch foam dimension in that giant roll, and mine is starting to get fairly small. I'll probably have to buy a new one here in a few months. Now I'll attach this piece onto the craft cardstock, trying to make sure to line this up with that scallop circle die cut. I'll be adding the yellow rose to the center of the scallop circle. I cut out 2 of the background stem pieces, although for one of them I didn't need the full piece. I'm cutting off that stem so I can tuck it underneath the edge of that scallop circle. And I'll glue that down using some liquid adhesive. Try to make sure to get the placement right so that rose is fairly centered. For the rose, I will be popping this up using some thicker dimension. This is Honeybee Stamps Black Foam Dots, and I love the little tab at the edge of the release paper. Makes it super easy to remove. There are times that I struggle removing the release paper, but having those little tabs makes it super easy. So now I'll be attaching that full stem, and I'm putting it on top. For the area of the stem that's right underneath the flower, I do want to pop this up so it's about the same level. I use some more of the foam dots and trim them down. I'll just remove the release paper and then put liquid adhesive on the rest of the stem and the leaves. Then I'll attach it to the card, making sure to line it up with that previously glued down portion of the stem. Now some of the leaves and the very lower edge of the stem will go off of the card, but that's okay, I'll be trimming those off. Using the same shade of green cardstock, I cut out the other leaves and also that little area that goes underneath the flower. Not sure what that's called. It looks like little leaves and then the top of the stem. To add a little extra dimension, I could have inked the edges of the stem and the leaves, but I decided to just keep them plain. I think it would also be fun to add some dimension to the leaves. So I just have a few more pieces to glue in place. One more of these tiny little leaves, and then the two larger leaves with that etched detail. Once I have all of the leaves adhered in place, I'll flip over my card to trim off those die cut pieces that are hanging off the edge. So part of the stem and that leaf on the right. For the sentiment on the card, I'll be adding "You Are Loved," and this is from the Sealed with Love stamp and coordinating die set. I've already stamped out the sentiment using the intense black ink on some white cardstock. Now I'll use the coordinating die to cut out the sentiment. I cut out a second die cut piece, this time from some green mirror cardstock. I'll put liquid adhesive on the back of the sentiment and attach it to that shiny cardstock, just offsetting it slightly so you can see a little bit of that really pretty green. Then I'll glue it in place right underneath the yellow rose. I did put an acrylic block on top just for some additional weight while that glue adheres. For embellishments on the card, I'm using the Hugs and Kisses gem stickers. Decided to go with just the green color and putting a few of them around the sentiment and the rose. Then I'm also adding just a tiny bit of glossy accents to the edge of several of the rose petals. I want it to look like morning dew on the flower's petals. So a couple more little spots I decided to add the glossy accents, and there is my finished card. Again, I did make two. I love the look of the yellow flower against the green pattern paper background and that craft cardstock layer. Now here's another look at the 4 cards I made using Honeybee Stamps Lovely Layers Roses die set. If you are interested in any of the products I used in this video, I do have links provided in the description box below. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a wonderful day.